the last thing is, I was very disturbed this weekend by the article that ran on the Hotel Conference Center and the financing for it. Now, I've stayed out of conversations with design because I voted against it, and so I didn't feel like I should have a right to say what it looks like. But I feel like I do have a right to question some things with the financing of this. I was mainly disturbed that it was indicated that financing had not been secured for this project. And I'm concerned because of a project of this magnitude, in which I believe ground has been broken in some parts, that financing had not been secured. And I went back and looked at the documentation that council voted on, and there was an original deadline of September 30th that Bruce Thompson had to present of this year, a commitment of financing. I asked Bernard about that this weekend after the article ran and found that there was an extension granted to December 31st of this year for him to commit financing. My major concern is not even just the deadlines, but that on August 20th of 2013, last year, Bruce sat in front of this council, and I pulled up the video and I had to search for it, and I even emailed Breck this weekend because I couldn't find any documentation online for 2013 meetings, but then I ended up finding it. And Bruce said to us, "We met with our lenders and our financing is still fine." And I have some major concerns if that was not the truth, that when he came before us and said that. I want to know why on July 25th there was an extension granted to him to go till December 31st, and why there's ground even being broken unless I have no understanding about how projects work. But I know on other big projects, we've required developers to prove financing beforehand. And my concern is that this is a huge subsidy from the city on this project. And I want it to work now because it's been voted on. I don't want it to fail because we're putting money into this. It's got to work. But I am concerned now when the developer just admitted in a newspaper basically that financing had not been secured for a project that, according to the timelines, is officially the start, like, kicking off in January.
And it's interesting, just to follow on what Tommy said, I distinctly remember, and I'm going to just step one step over to when Cordish was here. Because I remember when Cordish was here, I asked them how were they financing it, and theirs was self-financed. But I kept going into the idea of, well, if you're self-financed, then what happens if you're the successor corporation? What is going to do? They said, we're not selling, regardless. But I remember that, and what was interesting is that you mentioned that, but the one thing that I think I remember about Thompson was the fact that he said that I have financing is in place or it's secured. It's whatever the phrase was, because Cordish was the one that struck me that I needed to know about. And so when Thompson said it, I didn't question him about it because that's how I understood it was there. And accepting his word that it was there, of course, I think, I don't tell you what the deadlines were, but I do agree that if we are in a position now where I'm sure that we have bonds that we have to issue, am I correct? Are we issuing bonds?
Well, according to that same timeline, even the amended one, it said that bonds for the city were supposed to be committed on September 30th, the same deadline he had.
So where are
But
we?
that did not change when the amendment went out for Schedule G.
So that means we could
Exhibit G.
be bonded off, and he's running on a lot of credit.
We manage our bond obligation under a cash flow method.
Mm-hmm.
So the capital improvement budget you get annually has provisions in for reimbursement, and so that we don't sell bonds until our cash flow needs it. And so, yes, that a portion of our financing, a significant portion for this project will be bonds, but all of our bonds are managed on that cash flow basis. We're not selling them boutique for each project.
Okay.
The sales are on a cash flow basis so that we don't have a negative arbitrage on this project right now.
But we are into the project for what we've spent in the past on this, which is tens of millions.
Well, it was 10 million to acquire all of the property,
Right.
and we've had architects, so we were above 10 million from the time we started this, yes.
Right, but I think that one thing, because I was out of town and I read it online, and I think what struck me is that we have now entered into a project where he could be running on a line of credit, we know how that works, or however, he could be starting a check, but we don't know where we're gonna end up. And I think none of this would have come up, frankly, if it wasn't for Will's problems. So we wouldn't have been concerned at all as to how any of this has happened.
So, to, I guess, answer a couple of
So,
questions.
yeah, if you
that
could
aren't-
tell
Sure.
us where we're at,
Sure.
because we're now in a project that he has no financing on.
So, if you go back, I don't know, over a decade when this process began with having a hotel conference center, a couple things happened. One is that you may recall that a public amenities fund was established. And the public amenities fund is 1% on the meals tax and 1% on the hotel tax, which sets aside enough funds to pay the debt service on the hotel conference center. So whenever we get to a point that we're issuing bonds that are related to the hotel conference center, we have more than enough money in that fund, which is going to pay the debt service. Okay? So then let's go back to the first question. During this process, the date predates me, going back, over a decade. There have been amendments to this MDA over time. Before you voted on this, or this body voted on the MDA, which I believe was in
2013.
April 2013, there had been no fewer than 5 amendments. And typically what happens is those amendments are provided to the city manager. And it could be anything that relates to time slippage, things of that nature. With that said, for a long time we were in pre-development. And the pre-development phase provided us an opportunity to see what the costs were going to be to get to more than 35% drawings and 50% drawings. And money is spent during that time period. But also, during that time period, as days slip, what occurs is that we would do something like an amendment. So in this case, while at one point we were talking about the financing in September, because other dates slipped, what we did is we had an amendment, and there are many things that are in that amendment. So if the concern is the developer getting financing for this project, that's not a concern that we have.
So did Bruce have financing originally or have a commitment letter? I mean, for him to stand up and, I will pull the video if you want. He said that he had it. And that was a year ago. That was over a year ago. And now all of a sudden he's saying he doesn't have it.
Yeah.
I
I'm not sure I know what you're saying, okay?
Right.
But having financing and having a group of people together that are a part of the project, and then having whatever's going to be the ultimate, mechanism. I'm not sure exactly what he said, but always in that agreement, there was a time that he would have the financing done. And what we have right now is at the end of this year.
We can certainly ask him what he meant by it, but in our business, to reconcile the apparently contradictory statements, you can reconcile it to take his expression of one of just confidence that I think that Gold Key might even, like Cordish, have the ability to do this through equity. And that what he was saying to you was he's been talking to lenders, and with the transaction, that he's got no worries about it. One of the exceptional provisions in this agreement is that as we're working towards the conclusion, we're both spending money, and if either party doesn't continue, then they have to pay the other party's expenses to that date. And so that if we did in fact were surprised and that Gold Key didn't have the financial wherewithal and had that default, then the contract provides for them to pay to us all of the expenses that we incurred since they started.
Well, keep in mind that we're not without precedent. We do know that this occurred at the corner of Brambleton and Granby, where we had a hole in the ground that the builder had begun the construction. Then all of a sudden, whether he was doing it on letter of intent or not, he ended up having to stop, and then the government came in and took it back, or took it over for whatever their purposes will be, whatever the federal government sees over there. He began it without having his money in place, or at least enough of his money in place. So now we have to look at where the cautious aspect of where we have to be is if he was supposed to have provided us with that, with what he's doing, and we've missed that date, we need to know. If we haven't missed that date, then we need to know when that got amended. Because right now, you have citizens who read the article,
Right.
and trust me, I got it. I even
That's
got
what
it
I
from
got
my
this weekend.
wife about it.
I got it from my husband.
My
You know,
wife
what are
too.
we doing that we have a guy who doesn't have financing, and we are now in a partnership with him as a city, and we're gonna bond, or, you know, I ultimately, you know, have to bond our portion of it. And he has told us he has financing, but now he has no financing. So we need to figure that out.
Right, and I would just say again that Gold Key is within the parameters of the agreement, with the financing coming to a conclusion by the end of this calendar year.
So, and I'm just curious, did the agreement allow them to break ground even without having construction financing in place?
Yes, because as Bernard said beforehand, written into the agreement is that if for any reason that they pull out of this.
I
they-
understand that, but you don't want to, legally, we never want to be in that position. We don't want to be in that position. We want to have that taken care of ahead of time. I appreciate
Sure.
that fact. That's how people like myself make a living, but we don't want to be there.
So who handles anything with finance now? Is it Bernard, or is it your staff or is it a combination of
It's
both?
a combination.
So when he has that financing before December 31st, unless it gets extended again, then the letter goes to you, or if he's going to pay for it out of all of his cash.
So what I'm hearing is if there are any issues you want to, it to be brought to your attention
I
immediately.
think so.
Sure.
I mean, that's what we're here for.
I feel like we're more asking a assurance on your part that things are going as they're supposed to go.
Yes.
That's, I think,
Exactly.
what we're asking.
Exactly.
Very frankly, I think the thrust of this article was less about the concern
Right.
of the
I just,
financing.
yeah.
The thrust of the article was who the financing was going to be with. And so I think and the headline was a little deceiving.
It was.
And so it was more that the headline made it sound like
Exactly.
that financing was in trouble, and really what the article was about, we're not doing business with a certain bank.
But it brought the question
It
up
did.
for me.
So
that's
I just need you here loud and firmly to say, no problem, we're moving ahead.
No.
And we
Thank
want, remember, it's on video.
Yes,
But-
so I'm just,
But we want an
But
answer.
Bernard can
You can
interpret it
find-
any kind of way he wants to. Don't forget that.
Now, I do understand it, that he may be significantly strong enough that he can do, if he's self-financing, then we just need to know that. If
yeah,
he's
I
self-financing.
really interpreted that he was actually he had lots of financing, he was just figuring out the best deal.
I mean, he could be strong enough that he'd be striking checks
Yeah.
or running a line of
Probably
credit.
still
That,
shopping.
I can see that too.
He's still shopping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Is that
we-
the case?
But we
He could
need
have
to-
one in his
we need to-
pocket and be shopping for 2 or 3 more. It could be a construction versus permanent financing.
Yeah.
So there are lots of, it's complicated.
Well, and like I said, he could be running a line of credit right now.
This is a $126 million complication, so.
You just need to understand this is not something you and I deal with.
I
Other
know.
people do it all the time. Yeah.
Okay, Tommy, anything?
That's it. That was number
Okay.
5.
Marcus, thank you for that assurance, and by the way, this is